I thought I was completely alone in the house that night, until I noticed the motion sensor light in the backyard turning on every few minutes. At first, I assumed it was just an animal, a raccoon maybe, or a stray cat wandering through the yard. But then I walked over to the kitchen window and looked outside, and saw a man standing perfectly still near the back fence. And he was staring directly at the house. That moment still gives me chills when I think about it. My name's Evan, and this happened about a year ago when my parents left town for a week to visit relatives. I had just graduated college and moved back into their house temporarily while figuring out my next steps. It was one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods in the Midwest where nothing ever really happens. Two-story homes, tree-lined streets, families walking dogs in the evening. The kind of neighborhood where people forget to lock their doors because everyone assumes nothing bad will ever happen there. My parents' house sat on a corner lot with a fenced backyard surrounded by tall maple trees. The backyard had a wooden deck and a motion sensor floodlight mounted on the back of the house. Normally, it only turned on if someone walked close to the patio or if a large animal triggered it. When my parents left, I actually enjoyed having the house to myself. No noise. No interruptions. Just quiet evenings watching movies or playing games. That night was a typical summer night. Humid. Around 11:30 p.m., I was sitting on the couch in the living room watching TV with the sliding door to the backyard visible from where I sat. The neighborhood was silent. Occasionally a car would pass somewhere in the distance, but otherwise everything was still. Then suddenly the backyard floodlights snapped on. The bright white light flooded the yard. I glanced over toward the glass door, but I didn't see anything moving. I remember muttering to myself, probably a raccoon. After a few seconds, the light shut off again. I went back to watching TV. Maybe 5 minutes passed before the light turned on again. This time I paused the show and looked more carefully outside. Still nothing. Just the empty yard, the wooden fence, and the trees gently swaying in the warm night air. I stood up and walked over to the kitchen window to get a better view. But again, nothing. I shrugged it off. Motion lights can be sensitive. Animals. Sometimes even bugs flying too close to the sensor. So I went back to the couch. A few minutes later, the light turned on again. This time something about it bothered me. 3 times in such a short period felt strange. I stood up again and walked slowly toward the kitchen window. The backyard looked the same at first. Empty, quiet. But then my eyes adjusted to the brightness of the floodlight. And that's when I saw him. A man standing near the back fence. He was partially in the shadow of one of the trees. Completely still. Just standing there, looking at the house. I froze. At first I thought maybe it was a neighbor. But that didn't make sense. Why would someone be standing in my backyard in the middle of the night? The man didn't move. Not even a little. He just stood there, watching. I instinctively turned off the kitchen light so I could see outside more clearly. When I looked back out the window, the man was gone. Completely gone. The yard was empty again. For a moment I convinced myself I must have imagined it. Maybe it had been a shadow, or a trick of the light. But my stomach told me otherwise. I walked through the house checking every door and window. Front door locked. Back door locked. Windows closed. Everything seemed secure. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe someone had just wandered into the yard accidentally and left. But then the floodlight turned on again. I walked back toward the kitchen window slowly. And this time, the man was closer. He was standing near the back patio, only about 15 feet from the house. Close enough that I could see more of his features. He looked middle-aged, thin, wearing dark clothes. And once again, he wasn't moving, just staring at the windows. My heart started pounding in my chest. That wasn't normal behavior. That wasn't someone who accidentally wandered into the yard. That was someone watching the house. Watching me. I reached for my phone on the counter and considered calling the police. But something made me hesitate. Maybe he would leave. Maybe if I ignored him long enough he'd just move on. While I was standing there debating what to do, The floodlights suddenly shut off. Darkness swallowed the backyard instantly. I could barely see anything through the window anymore. That's when I heard something behind me. A faint sound. From the back door. I slowly turned my head. The handle moved slightly. Just a small movement. Like someone gently testing it. My entire body went cold. Someone was at the door. The handle moved again. This time more deliberately. Jiggle. Jiggle. I slowly stepped backward away from the kitchen, trying not to make any noise. Then came the knock. 3 slow knocks against the glass door. Knock, knock, knock. My throat felt dry. I didn't respond. Another long moment of silence passed. Then a voice spoke quietly from outside. A calm male voice. Hello. I still didn't answer. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. The voice spoke again. You're home, right? Every instinct in my body told me not to respond. But something made me speak anyway. Maybe I wanted him to know someone inside was aware. I leaned toward the door just enough for my voice to carry. I've already called the police. There was a pause. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the man spoke again. And the way he said it still sends chills down my spine. I know you're alone. I didn't wait to hear anything else. I grabbed my phone and ran upstairs. I locked myself inside the bedroom and immediately dialed 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The operator stayed on the line while officers were dispatched. The longest 10 minutes of my life passed while I waited for the police to arrive. Every small sound in the house made me jump. Eventually, flashing red and blue lights appeared through the bedroom window. 2 police officers searched the backyard and surrounding area. The man was gone. They checked the fence line, the trees, even the neighboring yards. Nothing. No sign of him anywhere. Just when I thought the situation was over, one of the officers called me outside. He pointed toward the backyard. In the soft glow of their flashlights, I could see a series of footprints in the dirt, leading from the fence, across the yard, all the way up to the side of the house, directly beneath my bedroom window. The officer looked up at the window, then back at me. You said you were upstairs before you called? I nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else, but the implication was clear. The man hadn't just been watching the house. He had been watching me. A week later, my parents installed security cameras around the property. For a while, I tried not to think about that night, but curiosity eventually got the better of me. One evening, I decided to check the camera footage from that night. I expected to see the man appear around the time I first noticed the light. Instead, the footage showed something much worse. The man had entered the yard almost 2 hours earlier. He walked slowly around the house, stopping at each window, looking inside, watching, waiting, and the entire time, I had been sitting in the living room with the lights on, completely unaware he was there, standing just outside the glass, watching me. The basement door in our house had always been locked. Not sometimes, not occasionally. Boys, my parents kept the key somewhere hidden, and as far back as I could remember, they had never let me go down there. They always said the same thing. It's just old storage stuff. Nothing interesting. I never questioned it much growing up. But the night I stayed home alone, I heard someone knocking from the other side of that door. My name is Lena, and this happened when I was 19. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend to attend a wedding in another state. I had the house to myself for 2 nights. And honestly, I was excited about it. I'd stayed home alone plenty of times before. Our house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever really happened. It was an older home built sometime in the 1960s. 2 floors, a long narrow hallway connecting the living room to the kitchen. And at the very end of that hallway was the basement door. The door itself always stood out. Unlike the rest of the house, which had been renovated over the years, that door looked old. Thick wood, heavy hinges, and a small brass doorknob that was always locked. My parents had always kept it that way. As far as I knew, they stored boxes and old furniture down there. The first night alone started out completely normal. I ordered takeout, watched movies, texted a few friends. Outside, a steady rain had started falling sometime after dark. Wind occasionally rattled the windows, and the sound of rain tapping against the roof filled the quiet house. By around midnight, I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone. That's when I heard the first sound, a faint thump somewhere in the house. It was quiet enough that I almost ignored it. Old houses make noises all the time. Pipes shift, with creaks, especially during storms. So I brushed it off and kept scrolling. But then I heard it again. 3 soft knocks. Knock, knock, knock. This time I looked up from my phone. The sound had come from somewhere down the hallway, toward the kitchen, or maybe the basement door. I sat still for a moment, listening. Nothing else. After a few seconds I stood up and walked slowly toward the hallway. The house felt different suddenly. Too quiet, too still. The hallway light cast long shadows across the wooden floor as I walked toward the end. The basement door sat there like it always did. Silent. I stood there for a few seconds, listening carefully. Nothing. I let out a quiet breath and turned around. Just as I took my first step back toward the living room. Knock, knock, knock. The sound came again, clearer this time, and unmistakably from the other side of the basement door. I stopped walking. My stomach tightened. There was no logical reason for anyone to be down there. The door was always locked, and my parents were hundreds of miles away. I stepped closer to the door slowly. "Hello," I called out. No response. Just the sound of rain outside. I told myself it was probably something falling over. A box shifting. Maybe the wind rattling something loose down there. But then the knocking happened again. Slower this time. The sound felt deliberate. Like someone tapping. I felt a chill run through my arms. I leaned closer to the door and pressed my ear against the wood. For several seconds there was complete silence. Then something happened that made my heart skip. A voice. Quiet. From the other side of the door. "Hello." I jumped backward immediately. My chest felt tight. There was absolutely no way someone should have been down there. I stared at the door, trying to convince myself I had misheard it. But before I could process what was happening, the doorknob moved. At first it rattled gently, then harder. Someone on the other side was trying to open it. The metal knob twisted back and forth violently. The entire door began shaking slightly in the frame. I backed away down the hallway. My breathing felt shallow and quick. The rattling continued for several seconds. Then suddenly, it stopped. Completely. Silence filled the hallway again. I stood there frozen, listening. Then I heard something even worse. Footsteps. Slow footsteps moving around below the basement stairs. Heavy. Measured. Like someone pacing back and forth. I didn't wait any longer. I grabbed my phone and rushed into the living room. My hands trembled as I dialed the police. The dispatcher asked me several questions while I tried to explain what was happening. They told me officers were on the way. The next 15 minutes felt endless. I stayed as far away from the hallway as possible while I waited. Eventually headlights flashed through the living room windows. 2 police officers arrived and stepped inside the house. I explained everything as calmly as I could. One of them walked down the hallway toward the basement door. He tested the knob. Still locked. "Do you have the key?" he asked. "No," I said. "My parents keep it somewhere." The officer nodded. "We'll take a look." They brought a small toolkit from their car. After a few minutes they managed to force the door open. I stood in the hallway watching nervously as the 2 officers shined their flashlights down the staircase. The beam of light revealed an old wooden stairwell leading into darkness. Dust floated in the air. Cobwebs clung to the corners. The officers slowly descended the steps. Their flashlights swept across the basement. I listened carefully, waiting, expecting something to happen. But after a few minutes, one of the officers called up, "You can come down." The basement was empty. Completely empty. Just old boxes stacked against the walls. A broken chair. And dusty shelves. No open windows. No signs of forced entry. Nothing. The officers searched the entire area thoroughly before leaving. They told me it was probably an animal or the house settling. But something about that explanation didn't sit right with me. Later that night, I called my father to tell him what had happened. He listened quietly while I explained everything. When I finished speaking, there was a long pause on the phone. Then he asked something strange. "You didn't unlock the basement door, did you?" "No," I said. "The police forced it open." Another pause. Then he said something that still bothers me to this day. "That's strange." "Why?" "Because we lost the key to that door years ago." I was home alone that night when I heard the front door open downstairs. The problem was, I had already locked it, and I knew no one else was supposed to be home. At first I thought I had imagined the sound, but then I heard it again. The slow creak of the door closing, and footsteps, moving across the hardwood floor downstairs. My name is Marcus, and this happened when I was house-sitting for my aunt while she was traveling overseas for 2 weeks. Her house was much bigger than the apartment I normally lived in. 2 stories, long hallway, large kitchen and living room downstairs, and bedrooms upstairs. The neighborhood was quiet and safe. The kind of place where people leave their porch lights on all night and kids ride bikes down the street during the day. The first few nights I stayed there were completely uneventful. I mostly kept to myself, watching movies, playing games, enjoying the peace and quiet. But the night everything happened was different. It was around 2 in the morning. I was sitting in the guest bedroom upstairs watching videos on my laptop. The house was completely dark except for the faint glow of the screen. Outside, the street was silent. Most of the neighborhood had been asleep for hours. That's when I heard the sound. The unmistakable creak of the front door opening. At first I froze. I listened carefully. Maybe it was just the house settling. But then I heard the soft thud of the door closing. And footsteps, moving slowly across the floor downstairs. My first thought was that my aunt had come home early. Maybe her trip got cut short. But that didn't make much sense. She would have texted me, or at least called. I quickly checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. The footsteps continued moving through the house. Slow, careful, like someone walking quietly through unfamiliar rooms. I sat there listening, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a neighbor checking on the house. But why would they come in without telling me? The footsteps moved into the kitchen. I could hear cabinets opening, then closing, drawers sliding out, the faint sound of dishes clinking together. The person downstairs was clearly searching through things. And that's when the realization hit me. Whoever was in the house didn't know I was there. My heart started pounding. I quietly stood up and walked to the bedroom door. I locked it. Then I turned off the laptop screen so the room went completely dark. The only light now came from the street lamp outside, filtering faintly through the curtains. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. I spoke quietly, trying not to make any noise. "There's someone inside the house," I whispered. The dispatcher asked me for the address and told me officers were on the way. While I was still on the phone, the sounds downstairs suddenly stopped. Completely. The house fell silent again. The dispatcher asked me if the person had left. Before I could answer, I heard something that made my stomach drop. Footsteps. On the staircase. Slow. Deliberate. Each step creaked under the person's weight as they climbed higher. The dispatcher was still talking on the phone, but I barely heard her. All my focus was on the door. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Then they stopped. Right outside the hallway. I held my breath. Seconds passed. Then the floor creaked again. Closer. Closer. The person was walking down the hallway toward the bedroom. I stared at the door. The handle remained still. For a moment I thought maybe they would keep walking past. Then the handle moved. Slowly. Quietly. Someone was trying to open the door. My heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. The handle turned again. But the door stayed closed. But the person tried again, this time more firmly. The door rattled slightly in the frame. I could see the handle twisting back and forth, but they couldn't get inside. Then everything stopped. The handle returned to its normal position. Silence filled the hallway again. The dispatcher's voice broke through the tension. "Officers are almost there." A few moments later, I heard something downstairs. The front door opening again. Then voices. But commanding. "Police." Footsteps rushed through the house. Officers moved upstairs quickly. One of them knocked on my door. "Police. Open the door." I unlocked it and stepped out into the hallway. Two officers were already searching the upstairs rooms. One of them opened the hallway closet. Inside, they found him. A man crouched in the corner, trying to stay hidden. They pulled him out and placed him in handcuffs. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were dirty, his face thin and pale. The officers asked him several questions while escorting him toward the stairs. Apparently, he had broken into the house earlier that evening through a small window in the laundry room. He must have assumed the house was empty. Before they took him outside, one of the officers asked him something. "Did you know someone else was in the house?" The man looked over at me and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that makes your stomach drop. Then he said something quietly. "Oh yeah, I knew." Even now, I still think about that moment, because if he knew I was there, then the question that still bothers me is this: why did he come upstairs at all? If you enjoyed these stories and want to hear more true home alone horror stories, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which story scared you the most. Story 1, Story 2, or Story 3. And if you've ever experienced something strange while home alone, feel free to share your story in the comments. Because sometimes, the scariest part about being home alone is realizing you might not actually be alone at all.